Welcome to the FemiNinja Project. I am your host, Cheryl I Love, middle-aged ninja hiding in plain sight, dedicated to restoring human dignity one person at a time and helping you unleash your personal power. Discover that it's possible to look like a woman, act like a lady, move like a ninja, and think like a warrior. And remember, men are always welcome on the FemiNinja Project. Hello and welcome to another episode of the FemiNinja Project, and thank you so much for being here. I really appreciate it. We have an amazing guest today. Her name is Stacy Barrows. She is a certified Feldenkrais practitioner, certified National Pilates teacher, doctor of physical therapy, creator of Smart Roller and Smart products, and owner of Smart Somatic Solutions, PT. Stacy has a passion for teaching others to move better, feel better, get out of pain, and live the life they deserve. She is also the author of Smart Roller Guide to Optimal Movement. Stacy is also kind of a friend of mine. We met each other in 2008. Back when they had the national, or maybe it was even the international Feldenkrais Summit. And that's when I first met her. And I never forgot her because she just made so much of an impression on me. She is also a wife, mother, avid runner, swimmer, and lifelong learner. Who doesn't love that? So Stacy, thank you so much for being here and welcome to the show.
Thank you so much. It's so nice to be here, and I'm such a fan. So this is perfect. Two things: I get to talk, and two, I get to be here with you. Aww. So yes, I do remember that was the Boulder conference, and it was one of the most awesome conferences too. So yeah, thank you for that, and it's just great to be here.
Well, thank you. I'm just so happy, to have you on the show. Love talking to you. I love your background. And I have to say, that's probably because I have a similar background, but you have really taken it to a new level. So tell us how you got to be where you are right now. When did you start your career in health and wellness, physical therapy school, and then going back? You must have gone back to get your doctorate, is what I'm guessing. Yep. And then how you got to discovering the Smart Roller, just that whole transition of your life of lifelong learning, wellness, and movement, and helping people.
Thank you. I have to tell you that my profession is one of the most significant passions of my life. And I'm so glad you mentioned that I have a family and I have some other things, because they have been nothing but supportive of letting me just go ahead and enjoy the ride. And I was introduced to physical therapy actually when I was in high school. And this was a long time ago. So nobody even understood what that modality was. My mom worked in a clinic, and I knew I wanted to go into medicine, but I wasn't. When I was introduced to the concept that medicine was movement, then that was it. I was completely, and this is before fitness really had taken on, it was just some concepts of physical education. So that sent me in that direction. And I am so fortunate because it's a field that opened up many, many ways to discover, to use movement as medicine, movement as innovation, movement as a vehicle to connect. And so I got into physical therapy for about 8 to 10 years. And I worked a lot with the Arthritis Foundation. So I've always had a passion for people that have had persistent pain. I've loved my seniors. So it was really kind of a natural direction to go. But somebody had told me that there was a physical therapist looking for a contract therapist, and she does this work called the Feldenkrais Method. And the reason that intrigued me was, and this was way before anybody talked about neuroscience or even had the tools to talk about neuroscience. But Beth Rubenstein was one of my adjunct professors in PT school. So I knew she had some chops. I knew that she had a strong neurology background, and this was something she was very intrigued with. So she was midway through a training, and the trainings are 4 years long. And I came on board, but my brain, and I actually had a background in athletics, so I was very linear. I just couldn't open up the concepts of what this was really about. So it's been a long journey, but an amazing journey. So I'm grateful that she was able to introduce me to becoming a Feldenkrais practitioner. And so in a Feldenkrais, as I continue to integrate those services, then it was kind of fun to look at what else can I learn now? I had this new light bulb experience of looking at how do I bring and apply it into other aspects of my life, which was fantastic because aging is one of the most major transitions that we do. And so I've really embodied so many of the principles that I had along that way. In the Feldenkrais training, that was also early on because foam rollers were not even part of the fitness community. And when I saw them, and when I was already primed to be explorative and learn at a very different pace with using a very different approach to engage the learning principles that we know now support the neuroplasticity of our abilities. So when I saw the foam rollers, I thought this is something that's going to I saw what took off with the gym ball and the physio ball. So the rollers were going to be definitely there. So it was unfortunately a long research and development stage, because if you're doing this as a side job, producing a product, there are a lot of things that hiccuped along the way. So it gave me a lot of time to do more research and development. I slid those foam rollers, the modified rollers, under Mommy and Me classes. I did them under police academy groups. I had scouts. I had a lot of different populations to utilize and see if what I was thinking could be of benefit. Because I'm like you, Cheryl, we're big proponents of self-care and accessible self-care, because we know how much it feels good to move, and if we can figure out how to do that for others. So that's kind of where I am, and I love that it's still ongoing.
Well, and even talking about that self-care, it's also incredibly liberating and empowering because you have the tools to be able to take care of yourself.
Yes, yes. And I must say, how you can have those tools and you need to be reminded a lot. So I appreciate that one of the things that Dr. Moshe Feldenkrais, who was a scientist and had a very different background in science that helped us get away from the medical aspect of thinking in one particular way. But he really looked at it from a very geometrical point of view in terms of approximations. So when I feel like I've not succeeded at something I set out to do, and I realize, well, that's just another approximation. So we're working towards a goal. We are working in a process development so that we don't get caught up with the end game, because then we measure it against what we are not accomplishing. But I would just heard a talk this weekend from another practitioner, Eileen Baki-Rita, which when you are more able to stay in the process in the moment, you're in the moment. And that's not jumping into the future. And it's so difficult to, I think for us with a very attention deficit culture, we have either looking in the past or in the future, but the present is really where we can engage our ability to take care of ourselves better.
And I want to talk a little bit more about that approximation and that process, because we're always so anxious to get to the end result or the end game. But it's in that process that you really, maybe a traditional person would say, you fail or you make mistakes. And that's actually when the magic happens and the learning happens, is through the mistakes. So there is a saying in Feldenkrais, there's no right or wrong, good or bad, better or worse, just opportunities to learn. And that concept changed my life forever, because as I was going through my training, everything prior to that point in my life was one way or the highway. So to have that thought process and to have that sense of mind shift was just huge. It was painful at first too, because it's like, well, what do I do now with this? And I realized it's giving me my power back.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. And that's a really good point. Making mistakes my husband says, well, but are they going to cost me? So I have to differentiate, so yeah, I try and keep mistakes within the realm that they aren't going to cost me one way or the other. But also I think, again, that the process driven understanding really is our biologic inheritance. If you look at how babies evolved, and they have a certain, I love this book called Livewire, that he emphasizes the point that we have about 50% in our DNA, which is pre-printed out for us to, through evolution, to evolve off of. But that leaves a lot on experience. And so we need to know how, it seems to me, we could use some guidance on how to tap into the experiential learning, which means that we have to process it very differently. And let me give you some of the highlights. One of processing is we need to slow down. We know that if we are moving too quickly, we move off our habits. And therein lies an ability to be offline or not able to differentiate. And so when we do, and when you watch a child, and I've got a wonderful mother friend of mine that keeps giving me short videos of watching her daughter in this evolutionary process, where I think there's the key points I'm just paying attention to, what I want to show a particular patient or client. So those things, along the way of being a process-driven orientation, that we can we have to kind of rethink it. And it's, Feldenkrais had a big Eastern influence as well. So that you'll feel that because his background in judo, and I know you have a martial art background, there is a mastery that is only acquired through an evolving experience. And to think that you're topping off really ruins the ability to continue to work towards a better processing or basis of where you want to go with it.
It's really interesting because since you mentioned my martial arts background, my martial arts and my introduction into Feldenkrais kind of came at the same time. And I couldn't see, and of course, my linear vision and the way I always looked at the world, how the two were related. So it was really fascinating going through that learning process of Feldenkrais and learning new ways of moving, sensing, feeling, thinking, looking at the world and looking at myself, as well as putting that into the martial arts experience of, interestingly enough, in my art, we do move very slowly as we're learning the techniques and we're learning the movement patterns. And so it was almost like exponential learning.
Yeah, I mean, we've often said that, if when you peek into looking at a Feldenkrais class, because there's two ways to work, either one-on-one, which has a lot of times touch involved, but the class looks like what effort is involved there? They're just rolling around, they're doing things. And, the muscle, I call it, that we're working on is the ability to attend and to attend with such refined detail. And if you look back when we were processing the early developmental movements, is we didn't have all the things that would distract us off being in the present moment. And we were able to really focus with such an attentiveness that didn't have the wandering aspect to it. So, and there's so much to be said about that, because our thoughts are tied to our emotions, and they're tied to past learning, and they're tied to many things. So we can get distracted not knowing we're distracted. So I think that's what I've appreciated is that ongoing element. The other part that gives me I love giving hope to people too. That's always been important to me, and the ability to visualize in such accuracy. So we do know, I mean, there's more than 20 years of research that shows when we imagine, now we can see it on scanning, what's happening and what parts of the brain light up and what happens when we execute, but what happens when we also just imagine. And you can't imagine something that you have no prior ability to even imagine. So we have to kind of go back and fill in those voids or holes that maybe we don't have in that self-awareness. So we can, I love this comment that Dr. Amit Abraham, who's a researcher from Israel, he says we need imagery freedom. And so I like that. I thought, that's, we can certainly appreciate when we see the golfer executing it in their mind, that putt sinking in, but they've also done that putt hundreds and hundreds of times, but there's variables that they have to now sink it in differently, the lay of the lay of the grass or whatever it is. So our preparedness is based on our personal research, so that if we are able to do these things with such variable abilities, we're prepared to be spontaneous. And it's hard to be spontaneous if you carry a certain bodily tension around, which is that resistance that we don't know we even do because we acclimate it in our own selves. So we don't know it until we start having injuries or byproducts of poor use.
So let's talk about things like pain. I was a chronic pain patient in my mid-30s for 2.5 years. That's a whole nother story, but that's how this whole journey of lifelong learning and healing came to be. But when people are in chronic pain, it's like they're locked in some way. They don't see any way out. And of course, if they're seeking help from medical professionals or other experts, they might even be told that, well, this is it. This is something you're going to have to learn to live with, which is what I was told myself. So if you can kind of take the concept of what you were just talking about and apply it to somebody who is dealing with chronic pain, and how the Feldenkrais method and using our awareness and that type of experiential learning can help reverse the patterns that might be either causing the chronic pain or exacerbating it.
Yes, you just really tapped into a large demographic that finds their way to my door. And sadly, by the time they find their way to my door, they've really done everything but. So now they're pretty much really believing that nothing's going to make a difference of it. So that is a huge barrier for people to know that there are still the abilities to look into something differently. And the most important part about the Feldenkrais method is the emphasis. And I really push the point of the emphasis is to really let people feel some kind of ease. And so ease can come in with just knowing that they don't have to do something in a particular way. That takes some, I still have people, I walk them all the way to the door and they go, but what about the exercises? Or what about, and I see it float right back up because they've been doing their exercise. They've been doing all the things that they've been told to do. But there's something that's still making this perpetuate. And that's where we have to look at something that may be driven in a very unconscious way. So then we can, and the things that we then draw on are things that are fortunately coming to the surface. And that's looking at breath, and that's looking at feeling and finding support and finding what is rest? There's a certain inherent tone that our body has, while we're in a conscious state. So how do we do that? And people often are surprised that they're allowed to lie in a particular way because it reduces the symptoms. Somehow, some way, there has been a negotiation in their thinking that they shouldn't be doing something. And I can't tell you how many times that I'll say, well, why can't you do it if you feel better? And it's like they had to hear that, I guess, get permission for that. So there's a lot of that, not to say that everything is turned around, because it takes time to reverse patterns that, and what makes, we are understanding now in the physical therapy research that there are particular things that we could find out in the beginning, what may set somebody in motion to and I like using the word persistent pain as opposed to chronic, so that there is, we reframe it so that there is a way. And I think I also love very much working side by side with a very good integrative dietitian, which I do, thankfully. She's also trained in motivational interviewing. So I feel she uses her words like I like to use my hands and my observations of movement. And we tie together with a good functional medicine physician sometimes, so that there are ways that we're looking at things that maybe we want to clear a lot of stuff. We want to make sure, that there's not underlying things, that there are some toxic elements that they're getting as well. So it should be, and I do like being tied to I'm so lucky. I'm in West LA, and then there's, a very, very sophisticated group of practitioners that I'm able to work side by side with.
There are two other things that really kind of resonated with me when those words, those three magic words that you hear a lot in Feldenkrais when you're taking a class: make yourself comfortable. And that was another thing that I had a really hard time with. because number one, it was like, well, how do I do that? And number two, why would I do that? Because, you keep hearing the no pain, no gain, push yourself, it's got to hurt to be effective. And it was like making yourself comfortable was the most amazing thing I ever heard. And it was also really perplexing because a lot of times we would start a lesson, awareness through movement lesson, lying on the floor, lying on our backs. And I would think, well, I'm lying on a hard floor with a thin mat, and this isn't comfortable. This could never be comfortable. And it was amazing how after just a few minutes, that hardwood floor felt so comfortable, so yielding, almost like I was lying on my bed.
Yeah. And the floor didn't change, right?
Kind of thinking it didn't. No, I thought so. At first I did. I thought, no, how did that floor do that?
Yeah. And that's the thing, is that we do know that what's on the outside, our environment, and what's on the inside, our internal environment, we do know now that that's not a binary. We really do have a way of going in and out in our nervous systems of feeling, sensing, thinking, and acting. And we just have a way that, you're right. I'll bring up another thing besides make yourself comfortable. I think one of the mantras that we have still to work with is people come in with very strong muscular contractions. And they said, well, when I say you need to let go of your lower abdomen, because I'll see that their breath is way up in their neck, and that just completely seems, not in line with what they believe, because, well, wait a minute, aren't I supposed to? And so I have to kind of work my way back without trying to say, not to throw everything out, because definitely we want a strong core, but we need an integrative and a competent core. And if we are holding resistance in ourselves, and what happens after a while, it becomes organically with the fascial elements, it's dry, there's all kinds of ways that it starts to orchestrate, restrictive movement. So it makes it very difficult to coordinate. And I think that's really what we're looking at, is how do we coordinate our basic elements of movements. So make yourself comfortable. The next thing I will work with almost day one is I will make sure they know how to get up from a chair. How often do they do that? So if they cannot rest and they cannot get up from a chair, so it's important, and surprisingly, that we need to spend time with that, because it is so fundamentally how their self-use is. And if they are holding their breath, or they're clenching, or they are in the mind space of what they're supposed to do, and they're not in the space of sensing ground forces. So we have to really kind of bring it to that element. But I'll tell you what's nice about that is often people will come back because we spent a whole session on that and saying, well, I really didn't do the exercise, because I give them some things because they need to know they have to have it. And I said, really? So you didn't do any of the things I asked for. When I can look at them and see there's such a clear difference in the way they showed up that day. And I said, so not once did you pay attention to walking, getting up from a chair? And they said, oh, well, yeah, I did that. In fact, I couldn't stop thinking about that. Or, well, that's the power of awareness, is and non-judgmental awareness, that if you can walk and, with flow, that you don't, well, wait a minute, aren't I supposed to have a really good straight posture when I walk? Well, that's not what walking is. You need all the parts of yourself integrated in the movement. And we do things, from day one, almost walking backwards, something that just isn't habitual. But doing it in such a way, I wouldn't say that's unique to my methods, but doing it in such a way to notice the foot pattern when they go backwards. And as they pay attention, because they don't want to fall, that they are now shifting into the nuance of paying attention to something different and novel. So, and taking it slow, making sure it's safe. I have a long, empty hall, so I let them drag a finger along the wall. So there's such safety. And we need that, because otherwise the distraction is, how am I not going to get hurt? And that's not, we want them to know, what am I doing that's so interesting?
That brings me to another point when you just said that, the finger along the wall, just so they know that they're safe, so they know that they're not going to fall or get hurt, because that then would ratchet up the nervous system into the sympathetic fight or flight, which takes you, it's completely opposite of where we want to be. So if you want to just touch on that just briefly, the difference between, sympathetic and nervous system, parasympathetic state, and function, how we function or dysfunction.
Definitely. First of all, I liked what I read the other day that don't give up the sympathetic state. We need that state, right? I mean, that is what gets things done. That's what made me show up on time today. But we need to have a relationship, and it's also non-binary. The parasympathetic and sympathetic are really fluidly connecting, and so we need that. But when it comes to learning, we need to shift into that parasympathetic state, because otherwise the other one is really driven for survival, and it's not necessarily going to be preparing you to access the information that could help you have the acumen to learn. So yes, I think those are, certainly talked about things with every, and it certainly enables people to find the right rest state to be prepared for sleep. We know how sleep consolidation or sleep allows for memory consolidation. It's when the brain's kind of self-cleaning itself. So we need all these things that help us shift that way. But again, it does require us to know what that feels like. And so a lot of people, and myself included, we can get an anxious state in the body. And that anxious state can kind of keep the throttle going, and then it makes it difficult for us to lower that state down so that there is a way to integrate some new information. So I think I'm repeating myself, but hopefully that makes sense, that these are not opposite ends. There is definitely a relationship between the two, but we tend to get a little bit stuck more in the sympathetic state, and because we really are in a very driven, alert state for many reasons. So we need help. We need help to kind of shift out of that a little bit. And we can appreciate that when we are in that state, we're not idle. In fact, just the contrary. That is when our organs are really able to do the work that they need to do, so that they're not in that state of high alert.
Thank you. That was very clearly stated. So thanks. That was really great. The other thing that you said, and I love this more than I can ever tell you how much I love this, are the words persistent pain versus chronic pain, because that is such a loaded word, chronic pain. And when someone tells you that you are always going to have chronic pain, I mean, the mind is thinking, okay, this is it. And then again, ratcheting up the sympathetic nervous system, fight or flight, the anxiety, and you get yourself into that state that's really difficult to get out. So by changing that one word, really makes a big difference. So that is another thing that, to me, I learned was huge when I went through my training, was the power of words. I think it's the worst thing in the world to take somebody's hope away.
Absolutely. And, fortunately now we're seeing more attention to what is being said and how it's being said. And it's, medicine's really interesting. It tends to jump in something really strong, and then it has to draw back a little bit. And when we got all these wonderful tools to make diagnostic concepts, bring them forward, that, okay, there's this particular thing going on with your spine, there's this particular thing going on here, your blood work, whatever it is. But we have to appreciate how people perceive that information, how they take that information in. And as we know, they may hear one piece of that, and that could be that I'm damaged, and I have herniated this, and that. And so I do appreciate having a medical background, so that I can walk them through it and say, okay, yeah, this is something to be concerned with. But what about all the other segments in your spine? It's like there are a lot more parts of you, and we can do this in such a way that, fortunately, we now know that there are some of these things going on, which may be related to a stress that you're doing. But let's take a look, and let's be informed by that information, but let's move on your symptoms. And that's the thing that does help a lot, because if a light, gentle touch with a very clear intention, and I'm making sure they're learning from what we're doing, and they come back and they say to me, I feel better, but how is that possible? And so that's my opening to say, well, maybe it's not the damage you think it is. And maybe it's possible that there are some alternative things that you just haven't explored yet. And that's getting back to the value of letting people, if there's a good part of their body, you know, if where does it not hurt? And let's bring your attention there. And that, you know, that's why it's so powerful to work on the good side, to work on the side that's functioning well, and pay attention. What does it seem? Build on that experience. How is it possible you'll know what that is? But we really, you know, I will notice when I'm working with somebody, I'm really aware something's feeling good. And I will have to say, because I can tell in their biologic, the reference of the way their breath is, the way they're calming. There's a variety of things that you can see. But I will have to say, that feels good, doesn't it? And because I'll be away from the area that bothers them, but I'm clearly addressing it. Let's say I'm on their foot, but they came because they have horrible right hip and low back pain. I'm very aware that I'm going to influence the coordination in that space, but I'll say, that feels good. And they'll go, oh yeah. And I said, well, I'm not telling you that because I need you to just think I'm doing a great job. I'm telling you because you have forgotten what it feels like to feel something that feels good. And I get it. When we did our research, it was a while ago, but we looked at the effects of working with people with awareness through movement lessons with people who had persistent pain. And I would have them try to imagine movement. And I realized that was not in their repertoire. It was so far removed. And that's why we had to complete the study without doing hands-on. But at the very end, what I learned from this was I said, I'll take a volunteer. And they had gotten to know each other very well. And so and it was cute because I thought they would all want to jump on my table, and they kind of like let one person come to the front and do, you know, and get onto the table. And I gave her a lesson with hands-on, and she sat up and she goes, oh my God, that's what you meant by look for the comfortable sensation. And the people in the room could also see it, noticing it with them as well. And then when she got up and walked, they, as a group, these were non-medically trained people, did a gait analysis. They watched her walk and noticed that it had all these elements in it because they didn't know it, but they were embodying these tools as we worked along. So we had a place to kind of work within their framework.
That brings me to another point, which is mirror neurons. Yes. So even the people in the class or in the group who were watching were actually getting the benefit in their bodies, their nervous systems were paying attention and taking in a lot of the information that they were seeing that the person on your table was receiving. And even as a practitioner, as you're working with people, and I've experienced this myself, it has an incredible, powerful healing and calming effect even on me when I'm working with somebody.
Absolutely. In fact, you know, there's a saying that when you're watching somebody give a Feldenkrais lesson, it's like watching grass grow sometimes because of the level of quietness and ease and gentleness. But you're absolutely right. It starts to register, and it's really important. And that brings me to another point, that the training as a Feldenkrais practitioner is so much on your own personal being, because you're the vehicle of touch. And it's in that valuable space of awareness in yourself. I was just talking to somebody today saying, I know when my attention is shifted off working with somebody, because all of a sudden I'll realize that's not working. And I realize, well, I shifted out of me. And so I love the duality that we're learning together. We are proceeding together. And when I move out, the value of my touch is about listening. So if I then can, at that point, through prior work, sense that I need to notice my breath, feel my support, you know, work on distributing the work evenly, approximate the movement from somewhere that has more strength, like my pelvis. And so that you know, I'm moving off your comment exactly, but there are so many things that are happening in that really wonderful dance that you do side by side with a client or a student.
I would explain it to my clients, you know, who are new. It's like our nervous systems are communicating. It's like, it's not, with words, once I start touching you and once we start getting into the functional integration, it's almost like we don't have to even speak. It's an incredible dance at a very deep level.
Well, movement precedes language, and certainly through evolution and certainly through development. So we are reaching such a neural, such a primal state of the nervous system when that happens. And, some people may not know this, but some of my best clients are four-legged beings, because they are, I don't have that shingle out, but I certainly work with people's pets. And the neat thing I like to tell, and I tell patients when they start to question it, I said, well, you realize my best client is a Labrador, down the street or whatever. And the thing I like about that is a child and a pet will not necessarily be tied to the placebo in the same way. Mm-hmm. So that's a pretty strong element of knowing what we're doing is changing things on a cellular level. So, and I really did have a remarkable experience working with a pet of ours that had some serious coccygeal pain, tail pain, and to the point where, and just whining, and I was able to get it. First of all, he trusted me. That was the number one. And that's the thing that we're trying to do with our clients, is help that happen, because then there's an element that maybe that the work that's going on to guard comes down just a little bit. But then I proceeded to work around his ears, his gums, his throat, his going into his ribs. He didn't have to think, well, that's not where my pain is. Will she ever get to my tail where I'm really hurting? So, but I was tracking, and he was staying with me, which is interesting, because he would have told me, he would have got up, he would have, lifted. In fact, he probably did lift his head to look at me like, well, I don't think so. And then I wind my way back as I realized maybe I'm getting goal driven by it. Let's see what else there is to do. And the thing that was so amazing to me is when I got done, because he let me know that when that session was over, I just kind of pulled back and he jumped onto his four legs. And I looked at that, and I think he was just as surprised as I was. And we just walked around and just let him, integrate whatever that new information was. And so I just can't say enough that there is so much to be said that in the way we approach, how we approach. And that you've mentioned that too. It's how do we communicate? What are we telling them? How's that landing on them?
I have had multiple dogs for many years now. I actually did a rescue for Italian Greyhounds. The Colorado Italian Greyhound rescue person was me and my husband when I finished physical therapy school. And so we had many dogs come through our house, and a lot of them that didn't get adopted, of course, would spend the rest of their days here, because what else are you going to do? And I have used Feldenkrais on several of my dogs, and I cannot believe the difference. It was amazing, especially with Italian Greyhounds. They do have a lot of neurological disorders, and they're very high strung anyhow, kind of like me, which is probably why I like them so much. And we had one dog that actually had a horrible neurological condition. We couldn't even figure it out. He ended up, it was a nightmare. And we decided we were going to I had to put him down. And we had been out of town as this was happening, and he was at the border, but then at the vet clinic. And so when we went to pick him up at the vet clinic, it's like, this is not a viable situation, but I can't, after being out of town, put him down now. I says, we will bring him in first thing in the morning. He couldn't walk. He could barely move. He couldn't even get into his little Sphinx position. So the very next morning, very heavy heart, I didn't sleep very well that night. And the next morning, I just heard my husband's voice say, you need to get up and look at this. And so I sat up in bed and I looked, and that little guy had made it to the bedroom, and he was looking at me. He was wobbling, and I could see it in his eyes. He still had the spirit. He wasn't giving up. And I said, okay, it's go time. So I did a ton of Feldenkrais and physical therapy with him. My husband, he also had a deep sacral wound or ischial wound, and my husband did the wound care. And in a matter of 6 weeks, he was able to stand, and I'll never forget the look on his face. I actually had a runner in the kitchen so he wouldn't slide or fall when I would prop him in his Sphinx position because he couldn't get there. And all of a sudden, he was in his position and I was looking at him and he was looking up at me, and he got this look on his face that was like, wait a minute. And I could see him starting to push against the floor. And it took a few minutes, but eventually he stood up and he looked at me. And I mean, he was just so thrilled. And of course, I was beyond delighted, but I had to leave because I had brought somebody up to Denver to do a 3-day Feldenkrais workshop for dancers. I'm like, oh my God, I've got to leave Giovanni. I can't believe this. So that's the first thing I did was, oh my gosh, Giovanni stood today. And we got another year out of him. Not only could he stand, he eventually got walking and running. And so, it was a much better outcome.
Absolutely. That's great. That's a great story.
Yeah.
And there are some very, very wonderful practitioners that work solely with our four-legged and other species. And one of which is Linda Tillington-Jones with the P-Touch, who most people who have any, pets will know about her. But what was really awesome about Linda is that, she would delve into understanding what was going on, and she kept building on the idea on a cellular level, what was happening. So what was beautiful is the research is coming around to look at how she looked at touch and how there was a way to do a certain pattern, a certain way of looking that related to the laws of nature. And so I just think that, this is exciting. Should we experience it a little bit? Do you want to try and just do a quick little thing so your audience may know a little bit of what this is?
Sure. And I'm wondering if we can tie this in to the 3-minute miracles.
Yes. Perfect.
Okay. So take it away, Stacy.
Okay. So if you are in a situation where you can't just pay attention to yourself, obviously driving and so forth, just go back to when you do have a chance to do this, but sit on a firm chair and just take a moment to notice your contact and just feel for a moment. Like I mentioned, you want to just you want to see what's the baseline. Do you sit a little bit onto one side or the other? And maybe something surfaces in you like, well, how should I be sitting? That's not the question. The question is just, how are you sitting? And notice when I ask the question, since it's open-ended, that gives you a chance to draw your attention internally into just noticing what you notice. And do you feel more weight on one side or the other? Do you feel that you're sitting more on one sit bone or the other? And just feel where your feet are resting. Are they able to balance you easily? So a lot of times we tend to cut ourselves off from the waist when we're sitting, when really it's a whole bodily system that's keeping you balanced on your chair. So now take a moment and just check in with your breath and just feel where you sense it. Do you feel it in your abdomen or your belly, or do you feel it in your low back? And if you can, draw away from the chair so that you don't feel the back support. And that way, as I ask you as we move along, we're not going to do very much because it's 3 minutes. 3 minutes goes by fast. So I just want you to notice if you interrupt your breath, you'll know what that is. And so now what I'd like to do is just slowly look with your eyes, but use however way you want to do it to look to the right. And just take a look. And when you look to the right, see how far you notice that. You can turn your head. You can just look over as if somebody got your attention and just feel, what is that like? And then bring yourself back to the middle. And just that little bit, did you change the way you breathe? And come back to the middle. Now go to the left and just feel what that's like. And notice if it's different. Most of us have one side that's easier, and we can learn from the side that's easier. And let's just stay to the left one more time. Not by trying to fix the side that's not, but just to explore it. So now what I'd like you to do, we'll take the right just to make it real simple. I'd like you to take your left hand and place it around the back of your neck. So your left hand will go behind your neck. So now we're going to ask the neck to just take a little break for a while, and the head and hand, your left hand and your left elbow will act as one piece. Now I want you to take your left elbow towards the right just a little bit, but don't go as far as we did before, but just turning and come back to the center. But you'll do it in such a way that you don't go to your full range. And you just repeat that several times as I direct your attention. I want you to feel, do you sense a change underneath your pelvis, your sit bones? And come back and just, you'll notice there's not one thing in your body that moves that the rest of your body doesn't know that something's changing, and it will adapt if you allow it. So just do one more time. See if there is a tendency to either breathe out or breathe in when you do it, and come back. And you can do it with your eyes open or closed. And then bring your left arm down for a moment. And now turn to look towards your right again and see if anything changed. And come back to the center. So that's all we'll do, because I want to show how quickly something can change without stretching, without trying to do something in the correct way, but doing it in an alternative way, which is to inquire what you're doing as you're doing it, and looking for the elements of ease, feeling your support, and using cues like breath holding or tightening your jaw or anything like that. And these lessons can go on for anywhere to 45 minutes to an hour, sometimes less. And I would encourage that anybody has any curiosity, they can go to feldenkrais.com and find some free resources. They're there's a lot of accessibility to it.
So thank you for that. And just so our listeners know, I played along. So I was actually doing the lesson as you were instructing, and the difference in my neck and the tone in my neck, and even in my eyes, I could feel it change so much. And for those of us who are pretty much everybody out there, spending so much time on our computers, especially now with Zoom, we're doing so much more than we ever did before. That little 3 minutes that Stacy just gave us, to me, is absolutely critical to keeping our necks and our eyes, healthy and relaxed, and even into the pelvis. And it's really hard to try and explain how you can feel it in your pelvis or how it impacts the muscles of your pelvis until you try it. And remember, as you do it, there is no right or wrong, good or bad, better or worse, just opportunities to learn. So just the fact that you're listening to her voice and you're not watching her demonstrate or watching me do it is actually a benefit. You don't want to mimic somebody's movement, because we all move in different ways. We're all different, have different histories, biology, physiology, etc. We are all unique, and we really need to embrace that and just find your own way of moving, your own patterns, not somebody else's expectations.
Right. And to clarify something, because we just mentioned about the mirror neurons and observing and how we embody what we're seeing, but practicing it first and having it talked through as opposed to using the visual sense does give you an opportunity to see what is it exactly that I do on my own. And then you can look to something and try something, but it's very hard for us to wrap around a mirror image or something that to process that way. And not to mention, you just saw that we broke it down into just very small pieces. You have a background to observe a lot, but if I asked you to do multiple things, which tends to be the case when people are queued up to do something, there's so much other information going on that makes it very difficult to observe on the scale. So what I think is brilliant about this work is that less is more, the less effort. And there's actually a particular mathematical look at that. It's called the Weber-Fechner law. And it basically means when you're addressing something through your senses, and your senses are the portals of how we bring information in, that if you magnify the information, it actually tunes you down in noticing. So, the analogy I like to give is, if I am talking regular volume, but then I start whispering, people lean in, one, and two, if we look at what's happening in their brain activity, they're or pruning out the other outside stimuli. So what they're doing is they're priming their attention. So that smaller volume, and then like I make the joke and say, and if you use their name, when you use their name, now it becomes interesting to them. So have you ever been in the room, somebody's talking lower than the level, and then you hear your name being said, you have to work hard to pay attention to who you were talking to without that background. So we have a curiosity, we have a way of reducing effort and finding ways that we can really upgrade our systems.
That's a fantastic analogy. So now I want to go back to this 3-minute miracle, because you actually are a contributing author in the Feldenkrais Method, the book. Now, is this the one that's going into the second edition, or is it your Smart Roller book that's going into the second edition?
The Smart Roller book was the second edition, but I'll mention both because they both offer up ways that people can have an experiential opportunity to feel the things that we bring up. The first one I'll mention is a Smart Roller Guide. We did a second edition, and 3-minute miracles were something that what my educator, Mark Reese, had called them. And in other words, this is something that feels so theoretically based, which is why you like to give people a very quick moment to experience something. Then there's the moment to be able to understand. So, we think, we feel, we understand, by doing. So that's what we did with the Smart Roller Guide. And there are some YouTube channels that you can go to with that. But the Feldenkrais Method book that just came out this year, and it's got wonderful contributors that I am feel very lucky to be included with this particular A-list. But they are showing all these different applications. So they could be, children working with dancers. I did the Pilates chapter, but it could be working with athletes, working with special needs, working with theater. It's just, but also giving the foundational understanding of what it is and how people are trained. But it comes with QR codes, and the QR codes give us, again, a way to just quickly, I love how sophisticated these come, because you can just point your camera on it and you've got it right there and you have an audio file. And Handspring Publishing is the company that took on the project, and any of their books like Anatomy Trains and all the different books that they've done with Elizabeth Larkham and so forth, they're very reputable. So they did a wonderful job with it. And so did the editors, Stefan and Chris Kresge.
And where can the listeners find these books, both the Smart Roller and the Feldenkrais Method?
The smartroller.net is my website. And if you go to where I tend to put my blog, which is called Smart Trends, that'll bring you to the book, the Feldenkrais book, and it also will tell you where the guide is, the products and things like that are all there. But also a history, about Dr. Feldenkrais and just some ways to kind of apply simple principles. Because and in fact, my Instagram is really to just give people, some way to just be creative, getting on the floor, using a roller, a yoga block, or, in your case, a pole. I mean, there's so many exciting things to do, right?
Yeah, exactly. The possibilities are endless.
Absolutely.
And so now you do work with people in your office in West LA, and you also work with people online.
Yes. That there are some positive things that have happened with COVID, and that made us a little bit more comfortable with doing things online. And fortunately, this work really does work beautifully, because you can guide somebody through the directives of moving in smaller pieces and parts that maybe they don't necessarily know. So you can do those things online. You can be anywhere. But also I teach regularly for a fabulous studio, Santa Monica Yoga, which allows people to download the lessons for, I think, up to 7 days, so that you're not held to that schedule. And if you're 50 and above, UCLA, I teach to them. I'm starting one up in, I think, a week from Thursday, and it's finding your optimal strength. So we're going to be introducing these ideas, but bringing in influences with Pilates and physical therapy.
So if people wanted to, get these links or find you, get a hold of you, or even work with you online, if they're somewhere, across the country, they could just go to your website.
Yeah, there's that one, which is a lot easier, or the one that I made you trip your tongue over because it's a very long, challenging puzzle, but smartsomaticsolutions.com. So both of those are my website, but just go to the smartroller.net and it'll bring you there. That'll simplify it.
Okay.
But thank you.
Oh, you're welcome. Anything else that you would like to share with the listeners? Anything, last minute advice, tips, anything, just pearls of wisdom?
Wow. I just want to really actually come back and promote this. I love what you're doing. I love how you're empowering people. And, it was such a compliment to be part of the group. And I'm fascinated how productive you are. So I just love that. I think this is just a wonderful opportunity for all of us I have a long commute, so I love that I can get in the car and listen to a lot of these empowering stories. And there's one that, my sister has suffered a spinal cord injury last year, and she was also interviewed on a podcast. And it was just great I'm such a podcast lover, because it was just great to have her tell her story and how people responded to it, because it's been a tough time for people. Mm-hmm. And I think we need to hear stories of people overcoming things. Mm-hmm. And she just did a beautiful thing with that. So,
well, if she ever wants to be on the FemiNinja project, hook us up. I would love to have her on the show. But, that's another thing too, is not only empowering people, through the stories, it's telling our stories so we can communicate with each other and to give each other hope and to let people know that they might not be the only one who has this problem, or, you can heal from anything, and that there are so many different modalities and alternative treatments out there that people might not even realize are available to them that, maybe weren't when I went through my chronic pain syndrome, persistent pain syndrome, 30 years ago. And I just really want people to understand that there is always hope and there's always a way to heal.
Absolutely. If you don't mind, if I can plug one more podcast, I want to mention Pain Reframed, which was the physical therapists that part of them were from the doctoral program that I went to, which was Evidence in Motion. But they are doing a fabulous job. Like you said, they're bringing in so many different people with levels of expertise and people that are working their way through pain management. In fact, I had a client who she actually got a really good sense of guidance to how to titrate her meds down by listening to somebody who had a background in medical background, but she also had done this process. And she told me, she says, I never thought it was possible till I heard her story. And it was important because she would come before the pandemic, she would travel to LA to be with her grandchildren. And so it was a big deal because she had to figure out how to get access to her opiates, because, she's a very, very functional person, but needed those meds. But and so what was so empowering is that we got her to a place where she was managing them without having she knew that worst case scenario, if something happened and she couldn't get her medications, that she was okay. So it was just an incredible story. And again, I certainly don't want to suggest people should be just doing things without the proper medical guidance, but she had to be there to do that emotionally, which is great.
Yeah. Awesome. That's a great story. So Stacy, thank you so much for being on the show. It's been wonderful having you, and it's been wonderful connecting with you after all these years.
And we had so much to catch up on. So I love that. Thank you so much.
Thank you again so much for being here. I can't tell you how much it's meant to me. So really wonderful to have your expertise.
Thank you.
And everybody, thank you so much for listening. I really appreciate you as well. And remember that movement is medicine. Movement is life. You can heal from anything. Check out Stacy's website. There are so many wonderful resources out there. If you have any questions, please feel free to contact her. I know she would love to hear from you, and you can always contact me as well. And just remember to keep moving and stay healthy. And that is the way of the FemiNinja. And that's a wrap on another episode of the FemiNinja Project. Thank you so much for listening. And remember, be safe, be strong, and until next time, bye now.